price action, and therefore market needs to come back to deliver it fairly. So what is going to happen is this. Eventually, at some point, it doesn't need to be immediately, it doesn't need to be on the same day, but eventually when price comes back to here, the inclination is price is not going to come here and then continue down. The likelihood is, because there is a gap in the market like this, market is going to come and deliver that fairly to everybody. So we're going to have an imbalanced fill. We can see something like this. So now that gap that we had from here to here, that gap has now been filled over here. And now that imbalance has been taken care of, and the market has delivered fairly to both buyers and sellers, and then the market has determined that we're going to continue being in a bearish market. Now, this is from basic theory. This is what an imbalance is, what you're going to be taught if you were to research this online. Now, when I first learned about this, and I learned about imbalances and I figured out what they were, I immediately tried to implement it into my trading. And I knew that if we see an imbalance, that imbalance needs to be filled, and therefore that can provide a trading opportunity. And I tried. And the way that is taught to trade this traditionally is you can either enter upon the open price, so you can enter here, or, and the preferable option is you enter upon the 50%. So you pull a fib from the top of the imbalance to the close of the imbalance, you find that 50%, because that determines the average price point of that imbalance, and that becomes your entry. And therefore your stop loss would be somewhere here. Now, there is a few problems with this, a few major problems with this. Number one, unlike a mitigation of IFC is something that is a necessity. If it is a true institutionally funded candle, we know that orders are locked up in there and institutions need to bring price back to take care of those orders that are in drawdown before they continue trend. Now, the difference with an imbalance fill is price is coming back to fill that imbalance. What is happening inside here? There's no process of mitigation. The only thing that is happening is right in the beginning, when we had that jump, there was too many sellers. That means buyers did not get an opportunity to put in their orders fairly. So when price comes back here, now buyers have the opportunity to put in those orders. So what if the market determines that all of a sudden that buyers are in strength? There is actually an influx of buyers, and now price just continues up. There's no reason why we might not have an imbalance fill. It might come to fill that imbalance and then continue up. That is the problem with imbalances, or the traditional way people use imbalances. That, okay, if you're using it from a perspective of a hindsight, I can show you dozens of examples on the charts right now where I could convince you that imbalances is God's work, and you would have 100% win rate, because every time you see an imbalance, I could show you examples where it fills to the pip and then continues down. And it's something I tried to make work, and especially with this 50% model, you take a 50% of an imbalance, and especially if it's on a daily time frame, you look at a daily time frame 50% imbalance, that's showing you that there is a big void in the market that needs to be filled. And I tried to make it work for months and months, and I just couldn't find profitability with it, because at the end of the day, it is not a fact of the market. It is not a requirement of the market that it needs to, unlike a mitigation, it does not need to fill and then continue. It can come, it can fill that imbalance, and then it can also reverse. So we can't really use it as a trade tool. We can use it as something that exists, but we can't use it as a trade tool. And for maybe 5-6 months, I was trying to use it, and I was just making more losses than I was making wins. Occasionally I'd make a win, but in general, it was not a profitable strategy. So for maybe 3-4 months, I just stopped using it altogether. I removed it from my trading plan because I just figured it's not a profitable scenario. It's not something that you can utilize with confidence to say, okay, likelihood is I'm going to be profitable in the long run, because it was more like guesswork. At times you might fill the imbalance and reverse and get your trade, and at other times you might fill the imbalance and it just continues up. So there was no criteria for me to say, okay, this is justified. That was one issue. The second issue was this. Let's get rid of some of the drawings. Number 2 was the stop loss placement, because I saw plenty of examples of this, where price would fill that imbalance, that desired imbalance, and come a little bit higher. So then it became very frustrating that, okay, I would get that imbalance fill that I was looking for, but price would overshoot a little bit. And then it would do that imbalance fill and then continue down. So I was like, okay, this is how do I correctly place my stop loss? I knew that was an imbalance fill. It did fill that imbalance, but it just tapped my stop loss because I placed it right on the close. So then I started to put my stop loss with a slight margin. I was like, okay, let's put it slightly higher. And therefore, I had to increase my stop loss. And when I did take a win, the risk reward was not as good. And I was still taking a lot of losses because it was kind of a 50-50 thing. There was no real consistency in imbalance trading alone. So then I started thinking, okay, what is actually going on here is potentially this is an IFC, and it didn't come to fill that imbalance. Rather, it came to mitigate the IFC. That kind of thought process started to go through. I started to go through that thought process of saying, okay, what if it was an IFC, and how do I know? Is it filling the imbalance or is it going for a mitigation? Because they're kind of very close together. So then I started to think, okay, maybe there's some validity in it. But what I'll leave it for today is, let's just say imbalances are, if you're trading it like this, I wouldn't recommend trading them at all. But with our refinements, we have found a way that imbalances have become a critical role in our trading, to the point where basically the majority of my entries are based upon I'll repeat that. It's got to a point now where I used to look at imbalances as something that was inconsistent, unreliable, and kind of guesswork. So therefore, I removed it from my trading plan. So now I'm looking at imbalances as basically 90% of the trades I take, I'm at least factoring in some sort of imbalance. So it's actually a huge shift in our trading, and it plays a very important role. So I'll cover that tomorrow on its correct application. But just for now, I want you to understand what is an imbalance. If you can take away that from today, then that's fine. That it's a point in the market where price was not delivered fairly. So there's some sort of unhealthy price action, inefficient price action. There is a gap in price action, and therefore market needs to return to the price fairly to both buyers and sellers. Does that make sense? Do we treat gaps and imbalances the same? A gap is essentially a broker thing. That there's not gaps in the market that are consistent throughout all brokers. It's simply the broker could not deliver price or deliver orders at that price point because price was moving so quickly that they did not have buyers and sellers in the market at the same time. So they couldn't efficiently offer that. So a gap is a little bit different. It's not something that really exists, but it's a form of imbalance. But because the imbalance is where price moves so quickly that buyers and sellers could not come into the market at the same time. It was very heavily bearish, for example, and that could present as an imbalance or as a gap. So they're kind of the same thing, but a gap isn't something that is, something we should be striving for or saying, oh, there's a gap in the market. That's something we really need to trade. That typically we are taught that gaps in the market always need to be filled, etc. I don't really believe it in that sense. Okay, so this question by Joao, if we see an imbalance on the 4 hour, on the lower time frame, is there an imbalance? Essentially is what I'm understanding from that question. And you're correct that, if we have, let's get rid of some lines. Sorry. There is this imbalance that is right here from these two wicks on the 4 hour time frame, but on the 15-minute time frame, we might see something like this. So now that real imbalance is from here to here. So my zone of interest has now become like so, based on that. And if I come down to even lower time frame, let's do this in blue. So now I'm looking at the 1 minute time frame. I might see something like this. So now my true imbalance is only from here to here. like that. So of course, if you're jumping from time frame to time frame, you're going to see difference. You're going to see different things. You're going to see different pieces of logic. So that's another reason why imbalances are not, they're a bit ambiguous. How do you know which time frame to play upon, and how do you know which is the more reliable one? That's why just for today, I'm going to say at least know what an imbalance is, at least appreciate what they are, but don't worry about how to apply them. We'll get onto that tomorrow when we do the lower time frame refinements. We'll go into how to correctly utilize imbalances. And this is something that is our refinement. This is our edge. We're not really seeing people doing it in the way that we do it, but we know plenty of people probably know imbalances exist. I know today, it was like 50-50. Half of you knew what it was, half of you didn't know what it was. But it's about not about knowing the concepts again, it's about its application. It's about knowing how to apply them correctly. So tomorrow we'll cover how to utilize imbalances correctly, but I just want to make sure, has everybody understood the three main things I was covering right now, which is that the concepts of IFC, the concept of equal highs and equal lows, and the concept of imbalances? Are those three things correctly understood by everyone? Awesome. Okay, I just have one last thing I want to cover for today before I sign off, and it's quite an important one. So would people would like a 10-minute break or something before we continue? Cool. All right, I'll give everyone a 10-minute break. Let's come back at 10 past the hour, and then we'll continue with the last point.